including one on the Associated Press, which says the FBI is investigating reports of a plane hijacking just before the World Trade Center actually crashed. And John McCarthy, our national security correspondent, is with us in Washington. John, what do you know?
Peter, we do hear that there was a hijacking. It is not clear where that hijacking occurred at this point, but it is one of the many things that U.S. officials are scrambling to try to get a handle on at this point.
Anything else, John? What happens at the Pentagon at a moment like this? I know everybody springs into action, but what do?
What happens is there is a particular counterterrorism cell within the Joint Chiefs of Staff that goes into an emergency basis at this point. They're investigating all aspects of air traffic in the area, all intelligence that, as they sift through it, may have given them some indication that something was happening. At this point, though, there were no warnings, they say, this morning. As they go back through this information, they may cull through it and find some clue, but at this point they believe there is no warning.
Thank you very much, John. Which would please call us back as soon as you have something which would call into question immediately, of course, the notion of counterterrorism in an incident like this. Now, nobody who's watching television, watching Good Morning America today, for example, saw, at least those of us working on television, saw a first plane crash into the building. Much of the country watching television this morning will have seen the second plane crash into the other tower. And we have, as you can see from a distance there, until we get our cameras on the ground producing material which we can put on the air, a pretty limited view. So we have no idea what the evacuation procedure is in the building. We do know...
We're listening in the background. At this time, all elevators are out in both towers, according to the rescue workers on the scene. They put out an urgent call for Scott air packs because they're climbing smoke-filled stairwells. They've got to go very high up to get to the target locations, and they're talking about people trapped in the smoke there.
And this, of course, is reminiscent of 1993 when the explosions occurred at the trade towers last time.
Exactly.
John, is it standard operating procedure? You mentioned that all of the other principal government buildings in the city, Gracie Mansion, the mayor's official residence, and some of the other buildings will be evacuated. Is that a fairly standard anticipated operation?
It is an existing plan that is on paper, but Peter, I have to say, it's never been put into effect in New York. This is unprecedented, and I think as this develops, you'll see similar plans go into effect in Washington and potential target buildings, because they really have to take the position that they're under some form of attack here, at least as a precaution, until they sort this out.
As we wait to get a better grasp of what now becomes a rescue operation of the people in the trade towers, we're reminded here that the U.S. officials, according to Pentagon sources, have no warnings today of any kind of terrorist attack. And if you listen to the news on a regular basis, you hear the Pentagon warning Americans worldwide of some impending terrorist attack. And here we are in the height of commercial America, with no warning whatsoever, no intelligence whatsoever, as far as we can tell, at least in these first couple of hours.
No, and all of the latest intelligence, at least the basics of which I've been scanning for months, have focused on the high potential for attacks against American targets abroad. Indeed, federal authorities and the intelligence community have reported they've interdicted and interrupted more than a dozen of those attacks by shutting terrorist cells down around the world. They've always been worried since the first attack on the World Trade Center that there would be another bold strike on U.S. soil.
And, of course, there are any number of targets which have been high on counterintelligence's list in New York City: the Lincoln Tunnel, the United Nations, the Holland Tunnel, the FBI headquarters, not to mention all of the city civic buildings which John mentions. President Bush is, by the way, going to speak very shortly to the nation about this, and then he's going to return to Washington. And we have on the phone our principal aviation analyst and expert, John Nance. Good morning, John.
Morning, Peter.
What would you like to contribute to this? Because one knows that it is indeed possible to fly an aircraft into a building if one intends to do so.
If one intends to do so, that's correct. And unfortunately, when you've got something that has been as worrisome a target as the World Trade Center, regardless of the way we've hardened it up on the ground, they have apparently, whoever they is, picked the one vulnerable area. The thing that is most disturbing to me is not only the fact, of course, that there are people more than likely in that building that have been directly affected by this, but that we may have an innocent load of passengers. The flash of that second aircraft across the screen is disturbingly close to what you would call the plan form of an Airbus A319 or an Airbus 320, also of a 767 or something of that nature. And that's a large airplane.
John, let me go slowly with you because, and we'll actually put it on the screen again, very slowly, so that we can see it come across screen. Are you able to identify specifically the type of aircraft by looking at this videotape as it comes across? Can we roll that, please?
I'm watching that right as it comes across the screen, and it is more than likely not a Boeing 737. That profile, Peter, is very close to an Airbus A320, A319.
And who flies the Airbus 320, 318?
We have quite a few airlines.
Okay, so
very few private ones.
All right, and John comports a little bit here with at least these initial reports that the FBI is investigating reports of a hijacking just before the second crash occurred. We had no... John, let me just ask you one other technical question about just flying in the World Trade Centers. When the first incident occurred, it was reasonable for people to suspect that that was an accident.
Yes.
From a flying point of view, is the World Trade Center always something to worry about if you're taking off from one of New York City's airports?
Not really. And the fact that we have had all these years since that B-25 crashed into the Empire State Building tells you a lot about the flight paths around New York City. You have to be so disastrously out of contact and off course, and so many things would have to go wrong to imperil any of the buildings in Manhattan. The fact that it hasn't happened tells us really how rare a situation it would have to be.
John, the FAA immediately asked for New York City airports to suspend operations. We can confirm that Newark and LaGuardia have closed down.
And Kennedy and Teterboro and Westchester. They've essentially asked all airports within a 20-mile radius to put a hold on anything taken off.
Teterboro Airport, which is in New Jersey, just on the west side of the Hudson River, and Westchester, which is maybe 40, 50 miles north of New York City. They're all suspended operations. Standard, easy to do, John, quick to do, it seems to have been so.
Fortunately, very, very quick to do because they're all controlled by air traffic control towers, and they can put a halt to the operations with one phone call.
Okay, John Nance, thanks very much. Call us back, will you, if you learn anything.
Peter, one of the difficulties they're going to face, as you can glean from this picture here, is the people who are trapped and need to be rescued are on the upper floors, but you see the plume of smoke covers the roof. The last explosion was at the bottom of the building and the smoke rose up, but they were able to make a series of daring rescues by landing, and they've trained for this and retrained, landing police helicopters on the roofs of the Twin Towers and pulling people out. It's going to be very difficult, since the roofs are now enveloped in smoke, for the police helicopters, which are arriving at a landing zone now, just below the World Trade Center, to be able to get up there till that smoke dissipates. And that's where they had expected to pull a lot of people out this time because they had so much success the last time.
Similarly, John, if you look at the two buildings, it does appear that at least in the northern tower there, or the left tower as you see it on the screen, below the incident, the building at least looks on the outside to be reasonably secure, and people will have a long, horrendous, terrifying walk down in a darkened building, but will at least be able to get out on the ground. By the way, Claire Shipman, ABC's Claire Shipman just called in. She's been checking with the FBI. She also says that the FBI had no warning whatsoever. Their crisis management operation in Washington is in place in conjunction with the Federal Aviation Administration. They are all now, which makes perfect sense, focusing on the recovery of survivors. The New York Stock Exchange has delayed indefinitely its opening today. This will just have not only an extraordinary effect on the national psyche, one surmises, dissimilar perhaps, but from what happened in Oklahoma City, but a very clear reminder to those of us in the United States that terrorism of a huge magnitude, with which we're somewhat more accustomed in the Middle East and in Africa, given the attacks on the U.S. embassies a couple of summers ago. But a reminder again that as far as international terrorism is concerned, and people's anger and even desperation on this occasion with the United States is going to find itself manifest here on U.S. soil. John, here's the president now in Florida. I wonder if everybody knows there what's going on. We'll listen to him.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is a